and welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PRWeek UK. I'm PRWeek's Deputy Editor Siobhan Holt. Before we start today, I wanted to highlight that tickets are still available for the Brand Film Awards. The ceremony takes place on Wednesday the 29th of April at the Hamyard Hotel in London. Now in its 10th year, the award scheme from PRWeek and Campaign is a brilliant networking opportunity and a chance to celebrate the best of filmic brand storytelling. Tickets are selling fast, so visit brandfilmawards.com to book now. This week, we're focusing on the hit BBC show The Apprentice, which has just wrapped its 20th series. I'm joined by PR specialist Lawrence Rosenberg, founder and chief executive of Rosenberg Media, who is one of the contestants this year. And I'm also joined by Andrew Bloch, the PR advisor to Lord Alan Sugar. Bloch co-founded and led Frank PR as managing partner for 20 years before stepping back in 2020 to launch Andrew Bloch Associates. He also works in an advisory capacity to several PR firms. So welcome both. It's been another great series, I think we can say, Andrew, of The Apprentice. And congratulations, Lawrence, on making it to the final 5 candidates. That's very impressive. How do you both feel? How do you both feel about it?
I think ask Lawrence first. I've done the easy bit. He's the one that had to go on the show.
No, I feel amazing. I think you've got to set yourself realistic goals going into, a process that's as competitive as The Apprentice. And I think for me, getting to the final 5 and the visibility, which is, probably the topic of conversation for today, of getting that far in the process and the opportunities and the doors it opens are just unbelievable. So it's a really great feeling, but it's been a very hectic year and a half of my life. And I'm now almost like looking towards what's next. But yeah, I've loved it.
Brilliant. So you say there about it being like a decision. Did your career in PR and comms influence your decision to go on the TV show at all?
In a sense, it was actually the reason I ended up on the TV show. So I've discussed this a little bit, but I actually ended up on the TV show because I was at a networking event as part of my job. My boss sort of realised quite early on joining Spreckley PR, which was where I was working at the time, that I was pretty strong when it came to networking, and he would sort of just send me out to events to go and meet people. And I met someone called Oliver Aguz, who was friendly with Trey, who was on it a couple of years ago. Trey was doing weekly networking events to celebrate him being on the show. And then I ended up backstage at like the semi-final and the final of that season. And all of the candidates from that year, just completely random from networking where it started, all of the candidates encouraged me to apply. So it kind of was the reason I did end up on the show, because without, I didn't watch the show before that. So without that sort of nudge along from candidates who had already done it and just the people I happened to meet and become quite friendly with, I don't think I would have done it. So it was kind of the reason I ended up there, but it wasn't necessarily the initial thinking for it.
And when you were on the show, did you use your comm skills like to maximise the opportunity whilst you were there, do you think?
Yeah, I think there's twofold with that kind of question. So I think from the one side of it, it's all about interpersonal relationships, what you're doing on the show, but also how you interact off camera, which I think is like one of the biggest missed parts of what happens on the show. I think there's always this discussion about who gets brought back and how you work with people. And a lot of that isn't done on camera. That is how, you interact with your peers when maybe the cameras aren't on, the relationships that you build. I know there was more than one occasion this season where it was kind of brought up that people didn't bring back their friends to the boardroom. And there was kind of a discussion and a discourse online about why didn't this person get brought back? And the reason, in my view, was the relationships that had been built off camera. And that is very much a PR skill in that sense. And I think, I did have a great relationship with pretty much every candidate. And that wasn't me trying to PR them. That was just me being friends with people. And I think that's what relationship building is all about. And then I think on the other side of it as well, that's quite interesting, is the PR skills that really came into it are some of the things that are most present and the things you see the most. So sales is a very PR-based skill. You're always selling things, when you've got a pitch going to the media and you're selling your story, you're selling it to the media. In Task 10, I think we sold to 3 different corporate clients and each of them offered me a job. So even though they didn't love the product, they were offering me a job because they liked the way I sold things. And then also pitching as well. I think pitching is something that I see Andrew does his monthly pitch reports. And I think that's, a big part of it as well, is the pitching is exciting. And maybe the edit didn't reflect it completely, but all of my pitches did get really good feedback. And that was something I was super proud of and came from my PR sort of background.
Brilliant. Well, talking of PR background, I'm going to bring Andrew in now. Have you worked on the full 20 years on The Apprentice, and how did you sort of get involved in the show?
I have, yeah. I've worked on all 20 series. So, I actually started working with Lord Sugar's company, Amstrad, 26 years ago. It was one of the very first clients of the agency. And to abbreviate the story, I think didn't have too much to do with him in the early days. He had a bit of a reputation of being quite fierce and not particularly liking consultants. So in our heads, we were like, we just stay away from him. We've got a good relationship with the head of PR. But obviously over the course of time, when there was new product launches and stuff like that, we got to know him better and better. And the opportunity to do The Apprentice came along. He got the job. And I think he was always high profile. He was one of the most prominent business people in the UK, but all of a sudden his face was being beamed into 10 million homes. And that takes things to a whole new level. And I think at the time, in the early days of working with him, it was always about inspiring young people to get into business. And we would go to schools and talk at Oxford University, Cambridge University, and wherever, just to inspire young people. And then he got made Enterprise Czar by Gordon Brown at the time. And that gave him a platform to speak to bigger audiences. So we'd trot off and do these conferences to 3,000 people, 5,000 people, all about inspiring entrepreneurship and encouraging people to be business people. And it was me, him, Ed Balls. It was kind of quite the events. So it was a fun times. But then he'd observed what was happening with The Apprentice in America and twigged to himself, this is a way to inspire millions of people, in one effort, as opposed to going around the country doing all these roadshows. And that was really his motivation. And it still remains his motivation to this day. And I think one of the things that often surprises people when I talk about the show is just how many people are writing in and commenting every single day whilst that show's on. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people are being inspired by this show. And that's what it's all about, really. And the reason why the show has had such enduring success and popularity is really the youth audience. And we're seeing it more than ever, interestingly, in the last couple of series. But this series, wow, it was unreal. Like, Gen Z love this show. It's the best performing show on the BBC for 18 to 35-year-olds. Now, with the advent of TikTok and Instagram, like, just the volume of memes, of commentary, of stuff going on, even watching the candidates and how they perform throughout the show, it's changed a lot since the early days, dating back to 2005 and when Tim Campbell won the show in the first series. It's almost unrecognisable.
And how then has your comm strategy then for the show changed over those years?
We adapt. And I think, look, my role is I don't do the PR for the show. I look after Lord Sugar. And then when a candidate comes out at the end of the process, I'll work with that candidate to effectively turn them from a reality TV personality into a credible business person. I help establish their brand, establish their business, and all the communication is around that business. What I don't do is the week in, week out PR for the show, which is done by Fremantle and previously has been done by Organic, by Taylor Herring, both of whom did a phenomenal job on the show. And that's kind of who Lawrence will have interacted with, will have been the Fremantle team. Where I get involved, I guess, is if something is potentially going to impact Lord Sugar's reputation from a personal perspective. So I'm in the loop of all the various scandals and skeletons that inevitably come out of the closet and all of that kind of stuff. But I don't really care too much unless it impacts Lord Sugar or the winner, who often I'll know who that winner is before the winner knows who that winner is. So I'm keeping a close eye on them and how they're being portrayed in the media, both sort of traditional media and new media.
And is that a challenge for you to make sure that they're both keeping that fine line between the two?
Sometimes. I mean, the thing is, I never really get bored of this show because the candidates are different every year. There's different personalities. I think I'm a fan of the show. It's hard to kind of say. It's hard to separate the personal and professional, but I never feel like it's a chore to watch the episodes and stuff. And you never know what's going to get thrown at you. And then at the end, sort of, it's almost like this factory and you get delivered a product at the end of the production line. And it's always different every year. And I'm sure we'll come on to talk about this year's winner, but it's been a phenomenal journey. The last 5 days have been an absolute whirlwind since Karishma was crowned as the winner. So very, very different from last year, the year before. So there's never time to get bored, and the challenges are always, it's the same as, if you've been working in PR for long enough, it's the same shit, different day. The clients are complaining, people are complaining, you're doing a good job, you're doing a bad job. It's, how to deal with things, but they're different, if you see what I mean. And I think it's the same with The Apprentice, having done it for so long, nothing surprises me anymore. But then it's always slightly different in terms of the challenges that are thrown up.
So then how have you guys worked together with the show? Because obviously you touched on it there, and Lawrence, what was your experience of working with the PR firm?
So, Andrew and I have met once before, and that was at the backstage very briefly of season 18. But it was literally just a hello as Andrew walked past and an exchange of business cards. And then I think you had something to do with some of the local press that I got, because I remember interacting with you around that. But yeah, we haven't had loads of interaction because I didn't win. That was Karishma's job. But yeah, around sort of my interactions with Fremantle, obviously having a PR background, a big part of the show for a lot of people is that media around them and how they are portrayed and how they're using that media to further their careers. So for me, I did need to take some ownership with that, because a big part of what I was going to be doing after the show depended on how much of that kind of media I was getting. So, there's been like bits and pieces. So this morning, that was an incredible experience to get to do this morning. That was, a brilliant sort of platform. And I got to speak about my business and, my time on the show. But also a lot of what I've done since the show has been off my own back. So I did a City AM interview last week. I was on GB News with Nana Akir. I was on LBC Cross Questions, and that was pretty much nothing to do with the show, but it was using the profile that I had got from doing the show to start looking at what I'm going to be doing next. So not a huge amount of overlap, but I would hope that Andrew's at least broadly pleased with my PR work on myself. But yeah, if you can't look after yourself, what can you do?
You don't need me to mark your homework, but you're doing a very good job. It's been interesting for me. Like I get these CVs that sort of come across my desk months before the show's even been recorded. And then I saw Lawrence's CV and I was like, oh, this is interesting. A PR bloke. I'll always look straight to what the businesses are. And you don't think too much about it. But I was like, that's nice. To be fair, I didn't recognise his name from that meeting. And I sort of went onto LinkedIn and I looked at his profile and I was like, that's really interesting. I was like, he's one of a few that I was looking forward to seeing how they'd get on. And then the recording of the interviews was happening. And all of a sudden I was getting messages from the interviewers saying like, would you mind looking over this business plan? They don't ask me always, but this was a PR plan for building a new PR agency. And they thought, oh, well, Andrew will be a good person to ask what he thinks about it all. And I won't go into too much detail. Let's just say the business plan was very, very long. And it was quite funny. And there was bits in it where my name was referenced, which I found quite amusing. And there was one bit in the show which didn't actually get aired, but Mike Suter, who's he's just brilliant how he forensically interrogates these plans. I think he turned around to Lawrence and said, like, in your plan, you said that Andrew Bloch and you would like him to be a mentor for your business, or I can't remember the exact wordings. And he said, and I phoned Andrew Bloch and he's never heard of you. And then Mike said to me, like, are you okay if I say that? And it was like, I can't tell you what to say or don't say. Anyway, they cut it because I think for most people outside of the industry, that would have been an extremely boring segment of TV. But it's kind of, that's what happens. And then, so it's funny. So yeah, our interactions were relatively limited, but I was following Lawrence. I knew how well he was going to do on the show and how far he'd gone. And I just had this, I guess, professional interest in how does a PR person PR themselves when they're on the show. And I think he did a very good, or is still doing a very good job of it. It is an incredible platform to build from if you know what you want to achieve and you know how to capitalize on it. There aren't many shows that shine a light on you, your personality, your integrity, your business acumen, week in, week out, primetime TV. It's an incredible opportunity. And that's why for the winner, when they come out the other end, really they have so much of a head start versus a traditional startup, because the audience is already sort of on their side, have heard their story, are rooting for them to succeed. They just need to keep their head down and get on with the business and make it something that is viable and interesting. But it's what a great start.
Would you agree, Lawrence? Do you think that the show really helps, or can it hinder maybe some people's view of PR and the comms industry?
It's an interesting one because I would say it's completely subjective because everyone is individual, and I think part of the beauty of the show is the discourse around the show. So some people love someone, some people don't like people, some people will watch it and go, well, I could have done that better. Why couldn't they just do that? And that is part of the beauty of the show, is that people sit at home and go, what would I have done? And I think with that, I've had people reach out to me from the PR industry, starting off in their careers or even just considering PR, and saying, like, seeing you on the show and seeing a PR sort of with that public platform has kind of inspired me to either do more or to actually go into the industry. And that's been really touching. And I think for some people, they'll look at me and they'll have not liked me. And that's part of the show is, you like some people, you don't like others. Even Karishma, who I think is one of the best winners that there's ever been on the show, I've still seen negative discourse around Karishma. And I think a lot of it is very unfair because I think she was borderline flawless for most of the process. So it really doesn't matter about what your background is, what you've done. It's going to be subjective as always, but I think the subjectivity is part of the beauty of the show. And I think the last thing I'd say on it as well is, you look at the traitors and Rachel, she was lying on national television with her platform for, however long the show was on and however many episodes it was. Now, you can look at that as two ways. Is she a phenomenal communicator and a great advertisement for the industry? Or does it show you that you can just blag it all? It's all subjective. And that is, again, like I say, part of the beauty of something like The Apprentice.
Do you agree, Andrew? Because obviously, as Lawrence has mentioned there, we've had like Rachel and the Traitors, we've had Love is Blind. There's a lot of shows now that seem to feature comms and PR professionals, much like The Apprentice. Do you think that's a great advert for the industry, or is it narrowing down what we do? What's your thoughts?
I think, as Lawrence says, it depends on the individual. Talking about The Apprentice specifically, I see it year in, year out. The candidates are publicised and the commentary is what a bunch of morons, blah, blah, blah. But the cream always rises to the top. And I think as long as you can get to a decent stage in the competition, it's a great platform to build from. I guess it's natural that PR people are attracted to these kind of shows because they can see the benefits from them. It's no different from entrepreneurs going on to Dragon's Den when they don't want an investment, but they recognise the fact that it's giving them free PR. What Lawrence has done is raised his profile within the industry in a way that probably would have taken him a lot longer to have done if he wasn't on the show. And it's now up to him how he capitalises on it. And of course, it can go wrong. And there are candidates that come across as a bit dense, a bit stupid. But, I think if you're self-aware, you know how you want to come across to a certain degree, you can control it. Of course, it's a factual entertainment program. If everyone was brilliant on it, it would be pretty boring. But they can't kind of edit in things you don't say, if you see what I mean. You can edit stuff out, but you can't edit stuff in. So as long as you keep your head on your shoulders, would I want to do it personally? No, I can think of nothing worse, but I can see the attraction for others for sure.
Absolutely. And then, Lawrence, I was wondering if you've sought any advice then from peers on handling your PR throughout the process, or did you rely on your intuition throughout?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I have mostly gone off my own intuition, and I think that was because I had a very clear plan going into the show. I think there's a subsect of the Apprentice fandom which really does not like candidates doing anything unless you're the winner. They are like absolute puritans of supporters of you should come onto the show, you should be a part of the show, and then once you leave, you should keep your head down and go on with your life without sort of doing anything from or with the show. I would say that's a subsect. I'd say like the majority of people do just like watching the show. They've probably got it on in the background, or, they probably dip in and out of full concentration. But
sorry to interrupt you, but like what's really interesting is that you see with the media, they will support the show comes to an end and then all of a sudden they're not interested anymore. And it's nothing personal against TV. Still sells newspapers. TV still gets clicks online. Whilst you're on the show, they are writing about it. Not necessarily good, but they are writing about it non-stop. Then a winner comes, or the finalists sort of come out the other end, and they're not interested anymore. Like, they're on to the next show. It's a fickle world. And actually the hardest bit of the PR for a winner, or for someone that wants to build a career off the back of it, is to keep that interest and that momentum going. And I think when you're on the show as a candidate, you can be in a bit of a bubble because you've got 12 weeks of non-stop chat about you. And then it gets to the sort of week after the show and it's like, hang on a sec, it's Thursday night and no one's talking about me anymore. It's quite hard. So they try and stay relevant. And you can either be relevant in the right way or you can be relevant in the wrong way. And I think the challenge is to stay relevant and front of mind in the right way. And hopefully that's what Lawrence is going to do. And from observing it from the outside in, what I've seen you doing is using the platform to be a spokesperson for the PR industry, which, I think is a great thing. There aren't enough prominent PR people promoting our industry, which is ironic. So to have someone that's got a good youth appeal that will attract new audiences that potentially might not have thought about PR as a career or something for them, or educating them on what PR even does. If Lawrence can do that role, fantastic.
And I suppose then as well, Andrew, then your role now, as you were saying there, doing the PR for the winner, really starts now, because I imagine the media probably lap it up, as you say, in the 12 weeks the show's on, but the real challenge is afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, this year there was a lot of pressure on this year. It's the 20th year of the show. We have a thing about round numbers, don't we? We think like, okay, it's year 20, we better make this one a good one. And I feel like, the viewing figures have been phenomenal. It's retained its place as one of the top shows amongst a youth audience, which is critical for the BBC. I think it's one of those shows where it's still destination viewing. It's still viewing that crosses generations and parents watch it with their kids. And there aren't many shows that do that anymore. But with Karishma as a winner, what's been so interesting is she's the first ever creator that's won the show. She has got over 1 million followers across TikTok and Instagram. I've spoken to her since winning about her strategy on the show. I think she told me she'd created 160 pieces of content before she stepped through the front door to record the first episode. She knew what she wanted to do as a creator. And then she's come off the show as the winner. And as a personality, I couldn't ask for anyone better. She's authentic, she's relatable, she's real, but she's Gen Z, like cut her veins. And she is Gen Z. She knows how to communicate. You put that next to Lord Sugar. I'm not going to call him a boomer. It's not worth my life. But two very different styles of communication. Together, what a combination. So if you look at how she's communicating about her experience since winning the show, and then you look at how Lord Sugar's communicating about her success since winning the show, it's just exploded. And I can tell you now, as of lunchtime today, 5 days after the show, I don't know when this will air, she's done £275,000 worth of sales since the final. Think about that. This is a product that sells for like 25, 30 quid. She's done 275,000. It will be £300,000 probably by the time we come off this call. Like, it's phenomenal. And that is the combination of social media, traditional media, and the hype of the show. And we've got a plan. We've got a long-term strategy. Like, I'm not going to tell you what it is now in case it doesn't work, but we know what we're doing. We've had a strategy for weeks and weeks and weeks. Like, we know where we're going with it. But to see the popularity on the screen can translate into sales is unbelievable. And that's what it's all about. It's about establishing a business now. Yes, I hope the positive headlines continue. Yes, I hope there's still momentum. But ultimately, if we're selling products, it doesn't matter. This is about and it is a proper business. I think that's the thing. Sometimes people forget. They see this TV show, it's really entertaining, but actually the hard work starts the day she's announced as the winner. That's where she's with Lord Sugar this very second. Like, talking through plans. Like, whereas all the other contestants are out, doing promotional stuff, going to nightclubs, film premieres. She's the one that's phoning me 20 minutes ago saying, this is what I'm going to say to Lord Sugar in terms of this. What do you think about that? Do you think I should say this? She is focused. But with Karishma, you've got someone, she really is quite exceptional. She's energized me as a winner. She is determined and hungry, but she's not delusional. She is. There will be big things for her. Like, I hope I don't have to eat my words, but I think she will go on to become one of the most successful contestants of all time. She is so driven, so dynamic, so focused on achieving what she wants to achieve. And for her, the way she's explained it to me is she would have never got in a room with Lord Sugar if it wasn't for this show. And you have to put yourself in a place where you can be with the people that you want to be with. And she recognized that she had the raw energy and the hunger and the determination, but not the business skills and the acumen of someone who's been at the top of their game for 50 odd years. So she's super pumped about winning this for the right reasons. So it's exciting for me. It's honestly been a roller coaster for the last 5 days. I barely slept. The media intensity has been so high.
I would just also add on to what Andrew was saying. I saw the behind the scenes of Karishma, and the Karishma that you don't necessarily see. She was brilliant on the task. And I'd say there's always the discourse around, what is shown and what isn't shown. I know Andrew touched on that just before about what's exciting. She was that good on the show, and you could just tell the drive was for all the right reasons. And she had so many outstanding tasks as a candidate. And then she had an outstanding business plan, and then she smashed the final. They're almost 3 different processes in itself to go through the process of the task, because that's not about your business. That is about how you act in a very pressurized situation. And then the interviews about your business, and then it's the final, which is a mix of both. And we got very close, Karishma and I, from sort of just after we got back from Hong Kong, and she was one of my best friends in the house. And and I said this in my Instagram post afterwards, sometimes you don't win, but someone that deserves it more and is better placed gets it. And Karishma is exactly that. And she will go on to great things. And as a friend, I am really looking forward to seeing her success for many years to come.
Yeah, I'm quite pleased you didn't win. You'd have probably put me out of a job, wouldn't you? I never really thought, thought about
what happened behind the scenes, Andrew. Now I know what happened. You were telling them they hate my business plan.
I was just going to ask you that, actually, Andrew. What makes someone stand out from a PR perspective versus maybe someone that might fade into the background? What advice would you give Lawrence?
I think, look, people go onto the show for different reasons, and everyone will tell you they're there for business reasons. The reality is they're not necessarily there for business reasons. So, you'll see, I don't know, a character like Kieran, huge personality. Personally, it's only my perspective, I don't believe he was on the show to get business partnership with Lord Sugar. I mean, he might have been happy if he happened to chance it, but I think he had a huge personality and he recognised that would be a platform to do whatever comes next in the media. I think for Lawrence, my take on it, and it feels a bit weird telling you what I think about you when you're sat on a screen looking at me, but, I feel like you're on it for the right reasons. I think you went into it. In some ways, I could almost hear your brain thinking a little bit too hard. Sometimes when you understand the mechanics of PR and TV and production, it's hard to be yourself because you're trying to second guess how it could go wrong or what might be filmed off the back of something you say. So it's hard to relax. And I did feel with you, sometimes you were almost too guarded in terms of your approach because you were thinking one step ahead. I think now, you've established your PR agency, you've generated more attention and awareness than you could hope for. You now have to convince those that have seen you on TV that you're there for the right reasons. You're there to build a PR agency, develop a client base. I think you've got work to do in terms of telling people what you're all about as a PR person. What sort of clients do you want to attract? What type of PR are you doing? Then you need to get into entering the industry awards and getting recognition from that side of it. It's effectively building credibility as a PR person. But what a start. I mean, I think the hardest thing in the industry, full stop, is differentiating yourself as an agency. And, is there an oversupply of PR agencies? probably, but there's definitely an undersupply of differentiated agencies. And now, Lawrence, you've got this platform, an audience to explain who you are and why you're different. And just having a PR agency isn't enough. You don't want, one of the things I saw with Dean Franklin, who won the show last year, air conditioning business, he was getting call outs for people who just wanted to meet him. And then they wouldn't be ordering air conditioning, but they'd be pitching their business or asking him what it was like to be on the show. It's lovely. I'm sure it's great for his ego. But for Lawrence, you don't want to be doing new business meetings just for the novelty factor. You want to be winning clients. And so to do that, you've got to double down on who you are as a PR person, who you are as a PR agency, and why you're different from everyone else out there. But what a platform to start from.
Lawrence, on the show, were you concerned about what you were saying, potential crisis from it or fallout?
I think there's twofold to it. So I think sort of my best moments were sort of the very unscripted, unguarded, just you do what you want moments, because there is a lot that goes on behind the scenes. Obviously, I think most people do know that. And so I would say with the Goats, I think that was probably some of the best TV of the season, with Kieran and I and the Goats. And also Kieran again, because we are like two naughty schoolboys when we're together, was on the market with me in the egg costume and the flat cap Peaky Blinder. I was doing a Cockney accent. And that is when you are completely free. Now, I think the other side of it as well, I would say a lot of my better moments didn't get seen, unfortunately. So like even smaller bits, like in Task 10, we see 3 out of the 4 people pitch. But my pitch, when we were speaking to the corporate clients, they were all saying, oh, you were great. We wish we heard, even more of you. But I was sort of the only person who wasn't shown. So you do you can build an impression about someone being a certain way or being a bit guarded. But there was an element to it as well. I think Andrew is right. And obviously, one, I knew candidates going into the show, so I knew quite a lot about the mechanics of the show. And 2, you are kind of almost watching a bit of what you say. But I also valued the authenticity of those moments where I could just go completely into my own world, whether it was with the Goats or whatever. And, I also found a friend in Kieran, like you mentioned, Andrew, he is great TV, and regardless of his motivations, which I actually have never asked him, we're starting a podcast together and actually talking about things which, matter to us. And again, I know we've spoken about this already, but working in the media, working in PR, and actually being an active contributor to the media, I think is quite rare. And that was why Andrew was mentioned in my business plan, is there is a very short supply. I saw Andrew was talking about Kanye the other day. There is a very short supply of communicators that actually talk about communications and put themselves up to communicate themselves. And I think that was sort of a part of the gap that I had noticed. And yeah, I've taken on board sort of all the things Andrew said. And a lot of my planning before was, obviously there's one winner, and this year 19 people who are not winners. So what are you going to do with that platform? What do your next steps look like? And some of it I can't say right here what the plans are, but it's building towards that and what's next. But yeah, I do appreciate the lovely feedback and tips and advice.
And you mentioned there, so what is the plan next career-wise? Obviously on the show, it was to start using an AI platform that would be sort of the backing behind your PR agency. Is that still the aim, or have you changed it after some feedback on the show?
I'm going to drop an exclusive for you here. When my business plan said 500K, I actually had other investment, and that was part of it. And I don't think it was aired because obviously not the best TV, but I had other investment, and now it's about deciding the direction, refining it based off the feedback I got. So let's not make any mistake. The feedback I got, thanks to Andrew's input from the interviewers, I'm not sitting there with my head in the sand going, you guys just don't understand it. I'm right, you're wrong. No, quite the opposite. There was a lot of learning points from that. And I've pretty much got the offer on the table of pretty much, if I will run a PR agency, I've got someone that wants to build the tech. They're that passionate about building it for me and sort of understands the industry and all the rest of it. There's the agency growth, and, there's the things that Andrew has mentioned about what the next steps look like. I've already got an award for the 100 startups to watch for my agency, which is part of that agency award building. That was like 3 months into launching the agency, which I was, super pleased with. And then also, it was like I was saying as well, there aren't a lot of PRs that are public facing, consistently commentating. We know how to do it because that's our job, but we choose not to. And I understand the operational risk with, well, if you do screw up, then, well, what does that say about you as a communicator to your clients? But I always say, you know, where there is risk, there is opportunity. But really, the last thing I would say about what is next, and, you know, I've had brilliant offers from broadcasters to do more repeat things off of the relationships there, is I'm not going to completely overcommit into one specific thing. You know, if there is natural growth with the agency without the tech, you know, that is something that I'm, you know, looking at. You know, if there's huge growth in sort of broadcasting and then sort of keeping the PR, you know, and the agency growth as sort of something in the background, there are so many opportunities on the table thanks to the show. You know, I'm going to an event this evening, which, you know, I'm not particularly egotistical. I would argue I'm not really sure how I've got a place in a room like that. And there are, you know, people there that I would never have imagined meeting in some of the most exclusive spaces. But, you know, with those kind of opportunities, especially whilst the iron's hot, let's see where those conversations go. I'm not going to 100% double down and say, yep, I'm going to get investors on board, grow the agency tomorrow. I will see where the best opportunities are coming from, and then we will take the growth sort of organically from there.
On the show, even Lord Sugar made a comment, and I know you've received some posts on social about it, where people have sort of questioned the AI behind the agency and sort of saying, is that really future PR? I'm wondering what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, so for me, I think one of two things is going to happen with AI and PR. Someone is going to come in from outside the industry with no value for people and is going to work out how to do a lot of PR without the people side of it. Now, I am a huge believer in people, and I also believe that there's so much of the job which doesn't need to be done physically by a human. A human still needs to interact with that information, that data, but copying over 150 coverage links when you could be creating direct value for clients, I think there is an opportunity to do lots of things like that better, you know, building media lists that are super targeted. All of these kind of things, I think there is an opportunity for it. I would push back on that my business plan was written by AI. It was written by a human with AI elements, but I never hid that. I was always upfront that it was used for research, development, grunt work, those kind of things. But, you know, when you only get 4 weeks to write your business plan. And when you have those kind of tools that you can access, you know, I did want to sort of incorporate aspects of it. But the idea is that it is an all-encompassing platform that, you know, when a client needs a report, we're not sending an AE away for 3 hours, come back, report then gets sent over and works its way up. A lot of the reporting could be done based on parameters and what people input, sort of instantly downloaded from the platform, and then people can get back to focusing on stuff that creates direct value. So I do really believe in that, and there are now startups emerging that super credible PRs are starting, so there will probably be more competition. So I wasn't miles off the mark. Not necessarily sure I should be mentioning potential competitors here, but I have seen it, and I do feel quite vindicated by that, but also a little bit pissed off that I might have missed the gun on doing it early. So we will just have to see how things develop. But no, it's going to happen, in my view. I think there is no way that it doesn't happen, and we're seeing lots of businesses incorporating aspects of it. It's just whether it's human-led or whether it's AI-led, and I think it should be human-led because that's the relationships, that's the value, that's the PR is a relationship game. And I'd say last thing, it was Laura Anita. Claudine pinned me. My interviews were not in order that you saw them. That interview was the very last interview of the day. It was at 8:30. And I couldn't remember Laura Anita's name, and I worked with her on a story that was the front page of the FT. She said, couldn't be that good of a connection. I was like, she is. I know she is. I just forgot her last name, but I've had a good laugh with Laura about it since. But yeah, I think human-led with AI elements is the way forward, but I think we need to beat the person that gets there and doesn't care about people, to be honest with you.
Andrew, what's your thoughts?
You know, look, Lawrence is talking about efficiencies and the efficiencies that AI could offer, which is completely correct. And look, I've funded and helped build a network of agencies stacked, which has been built with AI for that very reason. For me, the bigger thing to grapple with, it's not about being the cheap bit that AI can already do. It's about being the really expensive bit that AI can't do and AI can't replace. And as Lawrence sort of alluded to, that's the strategy, that's the high-end consultancy, that's the opinion-led stuff that, as consultants, PR adds value to, and that's where it's at. And I think for agencies, we're all trying to grapple with AI. Anyone who tells you that they've got it all sussed, quite frankly, is lying. But as an agency, you have to convince clients that you can go with them into the future and you can show them that you're future proof. I think as agencies, we're all too used to sort of, I guess, leaning on our past laurels, showing them clients credentials of what we've done in the past, at best showing them what we're doing at the moment. Actually, what clients are looking for is, how are you going to help me understand this world that we're moving into, that quite frankly, we see the opportunity, we see the threat, we're a little bit scared, we don't really understand it. That's the key for agencies. So really, where if I was running an agency at the moment, where I'd be focusing is on the high-end consultancy side of things to help clients get their heads around everything. And yes, use AI for efficiencies, of course, but that to me is the table stakes. There's a lot bigger wins to be had.
Absolutely. And my last question, which is a cheeky one, is Lord Sugar as fierce as he portrays?
The most honest thing I can say is what you see is what you get. And that was the title of his autobiography for a reason. I would say it's a bit of a caricature of him. So look, he is someone that is direct. He doesn't suffer fools kindly. He has a zero tolerance for bullshit. You have to get to the point really quickly. I've worked with him a long time. I know how to communicate with him. What you don't see on the show is the softer side of him. He's incredibly funny. Personally, I think much funnier off the show than on the show. He is kind, he's loyal, he's got an incredible memory, he's a massive family man. The love he has for his family, this sounds so cheesy, but probably like the biggest thing I've learned from him is just how to balance work and life. And I see what he's like with his wife of many years, his kids, his grandkids. He's just got this incredible, this is a guy that has it all. He doesn't need to work. He works because he loves to work. But the way that he sort of balances family and work and personal, to me, that's where I've learned the most. So, is he the same as he's on the show? Yes. But do you see everything? No. I think you see a caricature of who he is. But if you met him in real life, I don't think you'd see a different character that was unrecognisable, if that makes sense.
Lawrence, is that your take as well?
Yeah, so I think the two things I would say is, first of all, is there was a very human moment at the start of the show. And, when you get there, there's 20 candidates standing there and everyone's super nervous. This is, my time, my moment. And first task, don't want to be the first one to go. And we're sitting in the boardroom and he just sort of, cameras were off and he goes, just remember to have fun. Like, just enjoy yourselves. A lot of work has gone into this, but just enjoy yourself. And you do have to remember as a candidate that, it is a TV show. When we're in Hong Kong, I'm sure he was upset with us, but also it is a TV show. And
he was so upset with that. Trust me, I heard it.
I also sometimes feel that, obviously it is a TV show and he's got to be extra harsh. And when Andrew's talking about a caricature, he is, he hasn't got that far by always just being Mr. Nicey. But also at the same time, everything on the show is dialed up. The candidates are dialed up. The interviewers are dialed up. Lord Sugar's dialed up. The advisors are dialed up. That's TV. That is exactly what happens. But we did have a few human moments. We don't get loads of time with him, really any off screen. I didn't make it to the final because Andrew was shitting on my business plan. No, I'm joking. So, I mean, if you get to the final, obviously you do get some interaction with him. But, from my perspective, I think he is pretty much what you see is what you get. I would completely agree with that. But I do think there is a very human side that is maybe not great TV, but is definitely there. And, you can see it through all the things that Andrew discussed. Family, work, how he puts himself into stuff. So, yeah, definitely both sides of the coin. And maybe, like Andrew said, I think caricature is probably quite a nice way to describe it.
Brilliant. Well, that's all we have time for today, sadly. Thank you both for coming on this week's episode, and thank you for listening. Bye for now.